Hello, everyone. I'm super glad you're here with us tonight for our very last Virtues of Resistance course. I have to say, out of all the readings, this one has been my favorite. So I'm very interested to see what Amanda has to say about it tonight, and I look forward to the discussion. So without any further going on my part, I'm going to turn over the floor to Amanda. So take it away.
Hello and welcome back, especially to those of you who have joined us for so many of these sessions on the virtues of resistance. This has been really personally meaningful, and I know if you keep coming back, it's also a value to you. So I'm very grateful for that. And today I've got some slides. I've got an empty bookshelf because I'm moving, despite my awareness that a room without books is like a body without a soul. And so at least I have the book for tonight's session right at hand. I wouldn't want my room to be completely empty. So today we're going to do a little bit of a field trip through slides to the German Resistance Memorial Museum, which has really been the key source for most of the content that we've explored together. Of course, some other sites and some other figures have entered in, but I was really so taken by my trip to Berlin last July and specifically to the German Resistance Memorial Museum. Having been to more than 50 Holocaust-related sites around the world, this one is one of my favorites because it's an educational museum about the ethical exemplars who actually give us some reflection on how to live with virtue and heroism rather than just looking at the somber and sobering history. So this session is titled What Happens Next? And it's not just because we're at the end of this session for ourselves and we're wondering what do we do with our lives? How do we go live the civic courage and moral fortitude that we've imbibed through all of these heroic witnesses? But it was also because there were those, as we looked at last week, very focused on the next day, very focused on what did they have right in front of them in terms of needs, people to get forged documents for, people to provide meals for. But then there were those who, especially among the more aristocratic families, had a much longer view. What is going to happen with a post-Nazi future in Germany? How will the country go on? What will be the new foundation upon which Germany is built? And so it's interesting to consider that even though they were in the midst of the fray, even though they were surrounded by imminent and widespread injustice, they knew that it was incumbent upon them to also pay attention to the future and to the long run. So the German Resistance Memorial Center is really connected to these figures because it is the site of the attempted coup in July, the July plot to assassinate Hitler. It was the headquarters of this conspiracy against Hitler, and this is why they chose to build the German Resistance Memorial Museum on this site. So Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators were shot in this courtyard, and just consider the image of all of the school groups coming to a courtyard where these conspirators in the plot to assassinate Hitler had been shot, and they're coming school tours, international visitors to this kind of courtyard in order to study this history. Here I am with some of the educators from the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem Holocaust Educators Program. Um, and yeah, this courtyard of honor now is a place of remembrance. These are all from the German Resistance Memorial website, indicating that this has been a memorial and educational site for quite some time, but the permanent exhibition and the translation of a lot of the content into English is much more recent. And they continue to collect documents like photos and archival materials, some of which don't exist online, or the English translations don't exist online. And I bought the set of all the English translations, and some of those have been used in this course in PDF for you. So I think it's really interesting material with which to work. Here you can see how all these different ethical figures are presented with very short biographies in English and German, and there's just so much to read, so many people to encounter, kind of face to face in this format. So you can see that there's a real focus, as we've tried to do in this course, on the range of resistance from the intellectual circles to everyday people, Jews, Sinti, the Romani people, the elites of the society, the everyday average people, the White Rose resistance, Christian resistance, resistance from socialists and communists, all stripes united in their moral outrage at National Socialism. So when you enter this memorial museum, you see quotations like this that kind of set the tone and that are also connected to the figures we're looking at today. Perhaps the time will come when one arrives at a different evaluation of our stance, when one is not judged a rogue, but an admonisher and a patriot. And how true and how prescient that is. That's in a farewell letter to his mother of Wartenberg. Now, on meeting us, a person must sense, writes Father Alfred Delp, who we met earlier in this course, that we know ourselves to be neither superfluous nor inferior, that we are not at all concerned with being alive a few days longer at any price, but that we are very much concerned with being the way we are at any price. So, um, yeah, just these examples of risking themselves, staking themselves, that there's a need to exercise this sense of responsibility. I think it's interesting how the museum is so civic oriented. Again, there was this reluctance to focus on German resistance for so many decades, as if this would be diminishing of the Jewish victims or of the German culpability. But now more and more we see this attention to those within German society who were the true patriots and resisted, sometimes at the expense of their life. And here we have, as in the document that we distributed for this session, some of those intellectual goals, starting points, goals, and tasks where they're reflecting on principles, principles of social life. It's interesting that today is the day that Pope Leo's encyclical on safeguarding the human person was released. And I think it's the first 96 points of that encyclical are surveying the whole history of social doctrine. And so a lot of what was being considered would kind of fit that category, even though that was a mix of Catholics and Protestants and people across the political spectrum. But they were interested in how do we live well together. They were interested in principles that could fall under the title of solidarity and subsidiarity and the dignity of the human person, and fundamental freedoms and a safeguarding of values. So this is the Kreisau estate, one of the meeting places for what became known as the Kreisau Circle. All these people, as I mentioned, of different social backgrounds and traditions came together, and a real protagonist of this group was Helmuth von Moltke. And we'll look at him and a few things that he said, and the letter that was assigned is a letter by his wife. Here, when you're in the section focused on the July plot to assassinate Hitler and on the Kreisau Circle within the German Resistance Museum, you see a few snapshots of these other figures. They all have these German, lots of aristocratic names, lots of kind of influential families. Now, here's our friend Helmut Moltke with his little son. And I remember reviewing some of his story during COVID while I was doing my daily blog about death. And I came across this line that really struck me, where he says in a letter to his wife, in one of his last letters to his wife, "My love, my life is completed, and I can say of myself, he died in the fullness of years and full of what life had to offer." That doesn't change the fact that I would gladly go on living, that I would gladly accompany you a bit further on this earth, but then I would need a new task from God. The task for which God made me is done. If he wishes to assign me another task, we will learn about it. So do make every effort to save my life if I should survive this day. Perhaps there will be another task. So such a sense of vocation and such a sense of resignation combined with a will to live, but a great serenity. So yeah, that was striking, I would say, particularly because he's saying he died in the fullness of years. Well, he was 37. He had little kids. And yet he was able to say that. The fullness of years. This is an article from the New York Times in 1973, so it kind of retrospective of his influence and I think commenting on a book that had been released about him. And so here it says that Helmut uh, Moltke was hanged in Berlin, age 37, and that he lived as long as he did might have been due to his name. So again, he, like many of the others, was from a well-known, well-regarded family, and that led to some better treatment along the way. Even when he was rounded up and interrogated and imprisoned, he received better treatment than many others would have, certainly because of his background. But eventually, that did not protect him. Now, the letter that I proposed to you for this session comes from this beautiful collection called The Last Letters. It's the prison correspondence between him and his wife. And the letter that I had you read is actually the first letter in the book, which is very interesting because it sounds like a last letter. It sounds really like they're coming to the end, but that was September 29th, 1944, and their whole correspondence, they're anticipating that death is just around the corner until he's finally executed in January 45. So it's remarkable that there's a collection of correspondence that's also pretty transparent, not overly censored. And here we have the reason why. The description of the book on the back cover explains that the prison chaplain was a co-conspirator, and he was the one who was bringing these letters back and forth between husband and wife. Hence the remarkable, real, sincere correspondence that we have between husband and wife, which is extraordinary. So then she kept these and continued to focus on his legacy and educating Germans and others about it. So this is toward the end of the um, well, this is a letter toward the end of his life when he's still not sure how things are going to go. And he says, as long as I stay in my current condition, that is, as long as God has the ineffable grace to let me know at all times that He is looking after me, nothing bad can happen to me, absolutely nothing. That is what I have to pray and beg for. Today will start the epistle to the Galatians, my love. I have nothing more to write than the same thing again and again, my dear, my love. How many final letters have I written you already? Well, here's yet another one. But it is in God's hands whether this is actually the last, and we have every right to say, my time are in thy hands. Deliver me from the hand of mine enemies and from them that persecute me. So he wrote that on January 12th and was executed on January 23rd. And the whole book has that character of final letters. It honestly reminds me of an event I did in the Diocese of St. Paul, where one of the testimony givers spoke about how every time she takes a trip, a major trip, and she travels a lot, she has for decades been writing her family letters in case something happens to her, and she doesn't give them to them. There's a stack of I'm going on a trip, anything could happen letters in a big folder. And so eventually there are going to be a lot of sort of almost farewell letters, but she says it's such a good spiritual habit to always be prepared to live with that fullness of years kind of spirit and resignation and gratitude and sense that our lives are given to us so long as they are a task. So with that, that concludes the little preamble teaching portion, and we will come to our discussion altogether.